Hey everybody, and welcome to another video from the Electronic Armory. In this video, we're going to build a complex application from scratch. I'm going to explain everything in detail of what it takes to build out complex applications in Android. I'm going to explain a lot in detail. This will hopefully make you a stronger developer in Android. This will include recycler views, web services, embedded databases, application architecture, and more. I'm even going to leave in the mistakes to show you how to solve common errors. This video is meant as a beginner to intermediary tutorial, but there's plenty of tips and tricks for the most advanced Android Kotlin developer. I love long format videos like this, but it's not for everyone. If you love them too, feel free to subscribe for more. This video was part of a live stream I did on Twitch where I plan longer format lessons I put on. So if you're interested in those, the link to the Twitch channel is below. Also, join the Discord channel to get help with your own code and chat with fellow developers for Android, iOS, and game dev.
But essentially what I want to do is have an app that has a bunch of data that is able to be entered in by the user, but then we also want to save that data up to a web server and persist that data and potentially pull it from different devices, whether that's through a login or a unique identifier for the user, etc. Maybe just an email address, however we want to handle that. So again, these are for you guys. If you want to review anything, if you want to see something specific, I know somebody had already mentioned implementing fragments, so we're going to certainly do that. Beyond the saving up to the web server, we might save it as into a persistent local database. We use web services to upload that data, to download a JSON file, maybe a static data at first. We'll just kind of build this out step by step. But let's just go ahead and get started with this. So one of the more favorite projects or templates that I like to start my projects out with is the navigation drawer. All right, so I'm going to call it Get It Done. Get it. I can't talk and type at the same time. Get It Done. All right, so yep, package names looks okay. I'm going to put this up on the repo. This will be all open source. And I think we'll put it into not the development folder. We're just going to do, let's say, app from scratch. Okay, Kotlin. And because this is a review, we're going to go a little bit slowly over these things. So minimum SDK, I'm going to click on Help Me Choose, see what the current penetration is for each version of Android. So if we wanted to go all the way back to 4.0, we'd get almost 100% penetration on that, meaning almost everybody can use this application. And by default, they use KitKat, which you want to use the latest that you can, with the caveat that obviously the later the use, the less users that will be able to install and use your application. So, some of these things are really old, and for example, there was a lot introduced in API level 23, and you can see all the things that were introduced then. Trying to think whether encoded user preferences are, or encrypted, I should say. User preferences are included in 23 or 25. So you can look at these and see if there's anything that you need. Every once in a while, I run across an API that's only implemented in Android M, Marshmallow, 6.0, or 23. It has so many different names, it's hard to keep track. But again, we can look at all these different versions or all these different features and see if that's the later version we want to use. But again, we're going to lose about 15% of our users. Let's just go ahead and use API level 23. Doesn't really matter in this case, but let's go ahead and finish. It's going to generate our application on another screen for some reason. All right, great. So let's investigate our application, see what we got so far. I'm going to expand this out, kind of do my workspace a little bit the way I like it. You can see we have a little mail button. We'll fix that in a second, but we always start with the activity main file, and we can see what that looks like. Obviously, these are embedded fragments and other elements that we're including as part of this layout. So if we wanted to actually go into this layout, maybe change it from home or gallery to slideshow, we'd have to double click on that, and we can get the list here. So start off with the main activity, and if you don't know where to start off, we can go into the Android manifest file, and under the Android manifest file, we can see that we have a list of activities that are currently in the application, and the main activity is going to be our launcher activity, which means that Android will launch this activity as the first activity that it is going to show to the user. So if you want to create another activity, and set that as the launcher activity, then obviously this metadata, this item here, you can put into the other activity. So that's how I know to start off there, and I am going to hold down, on mine it is the command key, and click into main activity, and that'll give me the code. Or if I want to go to the layout, then I can go into that as well. So we have styles, which is really nice because styles will apply to different activities, so you don't have to set the same color code on your buttons and background colors, etc. You can just include that in a style and have that get applied to all of our different elements, whether those are activities, buttons, backgrounds, views, etc. Okay, so I'm going to go into the main activity, like I said. I'm going to look at this code really quickly, but I want to dive in and start coding really quick, but I, again, want to call these out. It is using the old style find view by ID. This is fine. You can change it if you want to. I'm not going to mess around with it too much. But basically what we're going to do is define a layout, get a reference to the navigation view. We have something called a navigation controller. This navigation controller allows us to, well, navigate through the application, but specifically control and go back and just basically the whole flow. So if we go to another view or another fragment, the navigation controller will keep track of that so that when we hit the back button, it kind of handles that automatically. So we're going to give references to all these objects. And for the app configuration bar, we're going to give it these different items. So we're going to pass it a set. And a set, if you're not familiar, is kind of like an array. So it's a list of items, but each item in the set is unique. So that's why it asks for a set of. And we pass it the RIDs, or the resource IDs, for nav home, nav gallery, and nav slideshow, which is, of course, what the items in our menu, or this is technically a menu, but what these IDs are. So I can double click in these, and you don't see it in our layout here, but they're in the hierarchy, so nav underscore home. That ID is also nav underscore home. So if we want to refer to it, if we want to change any of its elements, such as the string that's presented as the name of it, the icon, etc., we can change it there. And of course, it doesn't show up here, but if I go back, there's a little arrow here above in the component tree in the hierarchy, and it says go back to the activity main XML layout file. And that's just a nice way to jump back and see what the changes are that we made. There's another include here. So this include is going to point to the app bar main. So if we double click into that, you can see that this is the entire kind of content for that. Again, I can jump back to the main activity. And if I wanted to go into this header, I can jump into the header and I can change the values here as well. So for this, we're just going to quickly set up the architecture of our application before we really dive into the UI, because my philosophy to building applications is that I want to build out the main components, like basically the backing store, maybe a backing database, the web calls, etc. Because if I do the UI first, I basically don't have any functionality, whereas I can just kind of throw stuff up on the screen, get the app working, and then make it pretty later. So it's kind of the way that I work. So let's start that out first, using the main activity as our kind of starting off point. All right, so just as a reminder, in our main activity, which is of course our launcher activity that gets launched first when the Android application first starts, we have Oncreate. Oncreate only gets called once for the lifetime of the activity. So this is where we want to start setting up our UI elements. But again, our UI elements are not on the screen yet, so we don't actually want to do any fancy things here like animations or anything. We just maybe want to get references to those items because they exist, or if we're doing the UI programmatically, this is also where we want to instantiate those views and then put them into our layout. So the other thing is we have that floating action button, which I said maybe we'll get rid of, maybe we'll use it as an add button for our to-do list, but we'll ignore that for right now, because again, I'm going to ignore the UI currently. So basically all of this code is just setting up the navigation and the floating action button. So the next thing I want to do is we need to basically either, let's pretend the app has already been in use for a while And we have already a list of to-dos that we have maybe saved to the device, saved to a local database, or saved up on a server, right? It doesn't really matter where it's stored because at this point, all of that is abstract to the main activity. Basically, the main activity just wants to say, I want to make sure however you're loading that into my application, I want to make sure that that's loaded and ready to go. We don't actually have a nice way of doing that currently, where the UI is basically already loaded, or it's almost being loaded at this point. So we have the ability to overload, or excuse me, to subclass the application class, which is our ability. And we kind of mentioned this when we did the object box lecture, whatever it's going to be called. If you look at our application in our Android manifest file, but if I click in Android and then name, it's going to expect a class for our application. So our application, when it launches, it actually loads the application class first, and then it'll start to load our launcher activity. So before I do this, I'm going to right-click on the package name and go down to Kotlin class. I'm just going to call it app because application is already taken. Okay, so we're going to call this class, and then as I mentioned, this is going to inherit or subclass the application class. And yeah, we need the parentheses, oops, 2 parentheses, starting in the end one. And then if you don't know how to use this or override any of the functions, I do recommend hitting Control-O, and this will give you a list of members and functions that we can override. And so I know this is pretty consistent throughout Android, but when things are created, we have an Oncreate function that's a callback for when this thing is actually created. So I can just say Oncreate, and it's under, of course, android.app.application, and I can say Oncreate. And again, this is essentially the first entry point into our application. But I want to show you this because it's a little bit more of an advanced feature. You don't necessarily have to do it this way, but if you're loading from a web service or something like that, you actually want to try to call it here. That way, hopefully, not always, because you don't want to rely on this because it could be a race condition, but you want to make sure that whatever it is that you're trying to load here is ready by the time your main activity is loaded. So just, it's a matter of maybe 10 milliseconds, if that. It's maybe even less than that. So this is not a foolproof way, but it's a little bit faster than trying to load it once the UI is already loaded. What we want to do first, just to make sure this is all working, because I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole before we know that it's working. So loaded application. I'm going to save that, put a breakpoint here. Too many of you are not using your breakpoints. How do I know? Because it's one of the first questions that I ask you guys when you're telling me that something's not working. So put your breakpoint there, and then we're going to run the debug build. So the little bug, I'm actually going to switch over to my Pixel 2 API level 29, the non-Japanese version. One of the apps I'm building is localized Japanese, so I need an emulator that actually has the OS is switched over as the language to Japanese, which is truly frustrating because I don't speak any Japanese. Okay, so this is loading up here in a second. Now we got an error. Okay, so oh, I forgot to actually fill in that name. All right, so the Android name is going to actually be the name that it is looking for. So we can do .app, or just start typing an app, and then make sure that we choose the autofill, because the autofill will make sure that I put the dot before it, because that dot represents the whole package name. So it's kind of shorthand for the package name. So in this case, edu.boisestate.app, and that is because it refers to this file over here on the left. But the dot, again, is just the shorthand for current package, right? Okay, so now that we got that, it should work. This is why I don't go too far, because usually have an error here or there as I go, and I don't want 30 errors. I want one error that I can easily track down because I know what I just changed. I try to override the application. Now let's switch over back to our emulator. And I'm going to make this screen a little bit smaller. We got our emulator on the right so that we can look at it as we develop. obviously if you have multiple monitors, it makes this way easier. So switch over to, okay, so I thought I ran this as a debug statement. Okay, I don't know why it didn't run the first time. Pretty sure I hit the little bug menu. But again, to stop it on your code, breakpoint, so click in the gutter. This is what the gutter, let's see, I got to click on an actual line of code, and I can turn these off. I can disable them. There's a little button down here on the left-hand side, and I can toggle these on and off. I can hit the button above that, which is multiple breakpoints, a little icon there. We see all the icons, or excuse me, all the breakpoints within the application. Investigate them. I can remove them. I can put conditionals on them, so only hit this once, and then from then on, don't ever hit it again. Or you can hit it or stop your code execution when some random variable that you have within scope is equal to this, so maybe only hit it on the 5th one, or when it's greater than 5, etc. So this is very powerful. I definitely recommend learning it. All the IDEs work this way, as far as I know. Any good IDE anyway, with a debugger built in. And if you guys are looking for jobs, one of the really good questions I like when people ask is, you know, how would you debug this, or do you have any experience with the debugger, etc. It'll save way more time. We have the watch window under here. This is our stack trace, so we can see where this was called from, but of course it was called from a bunch of Android-specific code. We have our variables. If I can grab this window and resize it. We don't really have any variables in here, but if we did, we can actually like investigate them, look at them, see what their current values are. And then also what we can do is, we don't have any variables that we own, but we can right click on these and actually set their values. So maybe something's coming in and you're like, oh, I forgot to set that, or I want to test when the server's giving me back a certain response, I can actually go into that response and edit the values inside of that response. So we have all those abilities. And if you don't see this window, by the way, it is down here, number 5, debug. Probably see that. And you can actually switch between those pretty easily based on those numbers. So not all of them have numbers, but like logcat, which is our kind of logging output, we can hit Command 6 and jump over to that. The window over here, our project file, our kind of file explorer, is Command 1. So if I hit Command 1 and toggle this on and off, so I can hit, go to the debugger, hit it again to hide it, and now we kind of have the full view of our code, and we can just kind of do this all day long. So memorizing keyboard shortcuts is a really good idea for Android development. And the nice thing is if you use other JetBrains applications, we showed this kind of a little while ago, but you know, there's PHP Storm, there's WebStorm, there's PyCharm, there's RubyMine, all these different tools. Android Studio, of course, IntelliJ, all of these more or less work the same. You know, obviously some might have like more web-specific ones, like database, local database viewer, etc. So. All right, so now that we know that we're hitting this breakpoint here, we know that this is working, it's all set up, that's all great. So I'm actually going to turn off that breakpoint because we don't want to use it. And let me go back into our main activity, or another keyboard shortcut to let your development go faster is Command O as opposed to Control O. And again, this is specific to the Mac, so you might have to look these keyboard shortcuts up yourself. But on mine, Command O will open a file. So maybe I don't have main activity currently open, but I can type in main and it will show me that file. I can hit enter on that and it jumps me to that file. So a bunch of tips and tricks. I'm going to get rid of this debugger really quickly. So hopefully that helps you out in your development for this. All right, so we got a whole bunch of things here. Let's go ahead and start creating the to-do item so that we can actually work with it. We'll give it the ability to add it to a static array list that will not persist currently, but we'll get to that. So I'm going to organize my project a little bit because I can foresee myself getting really out of control here with classes and everything. So right click on the package, or you can go to File, New, and etc. But this is the easiest way for me, is go down to New Package. And We can always change this name later, but I'm just going to put models. And this is going to be our data models. Right click within that folder. Go to Kotlin. Where is it? Right there. And we're going to want to add a data class, but there's no data class explicitly labeled here. So we're just going to start off with a class and then quickly change it over to a data class. So this one, we're just going to simply call it to-do. Actually, I'm going to call it to-do item. It's going to ask me if I want to add it to the Git repository. It's going to add these 3 lines of code, and then any changes I make are not going to be staged. So, I mean, just keep that in mind. But we have that. And then if you're curious, well, I guess I can't show you because I don't have the menu up here at the top anymore. But we have the to-do item. And again, we're going to change this to a data class. It's going to complain, but we're going to have a bunch of different, we're going to actually build in the initializer within our to-do item. So we can make some of these variables, but again, we always want to start off our variables with the keyword value, which means it's immutable. We can't change it once we set it. So we're going to set it, and then maybe later on within the application, as we built it out and we might want to update certain things, we can change these, but I always just default to values. All right, so what's the first thing that we want to do for the to-do is maybe the title, right? Like what's the to-do that we need to do? I always like to start off my member names as kind of a class name. So in this case, we're just going to do to-do instead of to-do item. And I'm just going to say to-do item, and this is of type string, so we do semicolon, excuse me. And it is of type string. Now I've kind of messed up this format a little bit. So what I'm going to do is highlight this, Command Shift left arrow, highlight it, hold down Option Command, and then hit L, and that'll format it for me. And the formatting rules are there's a lint file somewhere, that's LINT, somewhere within this project. I'd have to track it down, but I don't think it's actually labeled in here. And that's the file that basically defines how all these things are set, whether you're using tabs versus spaces for indentation, whether the curly braces, there's a space between them, et cetera. All those different styles, if you don't like them, you can actually define your own. And that way, when you do the auto formatting, Option Command L, it will adhere to those rules that you set. So, all right, so in Kotlin, we can't just say this is it, and then we're going to do another value, because it'll complain about this not getting set. But let's just go ahead and fill these out really quickly. So to do description, the description is also a string. We'll put a space after the colon. Obviously, we want a due date, so we're going to do due date. And this is of type date. And we're going to pull this from the Java util library or package. Do not do the SQL version of that. I mean, you can, but it's going to be radically different than probably what you expect or what we really need. So once we do that, Android Studio will also include the java.util package here. Now, if I hit Control Option O, that will clean up my imports. But it says unused imports not found. But let's say we did want to import something from the Android library, from, I don't know, animations and an animator, something like that, right? But we're not using that package. So you can see that it's grayed out. So one of the practices that I always like to do, especially before I'm about to commit code, is I'll do Control Option O, and that'll get rid of the unused package that we're importing. It's not a huge deal to do that, because when we minify and reduce our code, when we go and do a build, either as an APK file or as an Android app bundle, it will, the compiler will actually remove any function calls or anything that we're actually not using, including libraries. But it's just good form to keep your imports organized. The organizer will also I'm not really sure how it does it exactly. Maybe it alphabetizes it, but it'll actually organize and change the order of the package imports. Again, I'm not really sure how that works exactly, but it does. All right, so our data class, it's just defining our members, and yeah, maybe we'll add some more members here later. Like usually what I do with to-dos is they usually have a weight or like a priority. So I'll do to-do priority, and this is just going to be of type integer with a capital I because we're using Kotlin, of course. And priority, define how you want your priorities, whether a higher priority is 1 or the higher priority is like 99, or how that works. Right, so once we have our to-do item here, you can see it's grayed out because it's never used. So that kind of lets you know that you might want to delete it, but I'm not there yet. So, oh, what's also gray are these curly braces. It says redundant empty class body, and you can actually just go over this when this this tooltip comes up. We can actually just say redundant empty class body. When we click on that, it will take care of that for us. Do be careful with this because it could potentially mess up your code. So what we want to do is just make sure that our we're committing to our code repository early and often. All right, so this is just one to-do item. So we obviously need an object that controls all of our to-dos and is the central repository or repo for all of these to-dos. And the reason that we put it into a central repository is because anytime, anywhere in our application, either adds, removes, updates, or creates a to-do, I think I mentioned that twice. So creates, reads or wants to figure out what the to is, updates it or deletes it, as in CRUD, C-R-U-D, that we have one place that's handled in. So for example, we do not want to have one activity or one fragment creating or deleting a to-do and having that kind of all those other operations happening in different parts of our application, because when there's a bug and say, okay, well, this to-do is not getting created properly, then we can track down exactly the piece of code that is responsible for that and not have to track down several different places within our application. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, so we're going to go ahead and do that really quickly. I'm just going to drop it in our main package. So file new, going to create a new Kotlin file/class. All right, so what I like to do is create an object. And an object, there's only one that ever exists within the application lifecycle. So we're only going to have one to-do manager. So anytime a to-do is created, updated, etc., we want to go through the to-do manager, but we only want one to-do manager. There's no reason to have multiple to-do managers. Maybe there is, but not as part of my application here. So I'm going to go and create an object, but let's give it a name first. To-do manager. You can call this controller. There's a bunch of names that we want to give it, but I like to say manager. Okay, add it to our Git repository. All right, so here's our to-do manager. Again, because it's not a class, which we can instantiate multiple versions of, this is an object. We don't need to instantiate any objects, we just start using it. So the first thing that we probably want is a nice list, a mutable list that we can add, change later, of our to-do items. So again, we're going to start this off as a value. The value does not affect the mutability of our object or our list. It just affects the fact that we can't reassign this variable to another list. That's all it does. It doesn't mean the list itself can't add items or anything like that. So there's a little bit of a distinction there. So value, let's just call this M for member, and then to-do list. And the helpful Kotlin autocomplete here can give us a list template, but we actually want to do a mutable list, but I'm going to say mutable list of, and just do it that way. And then since we already created our model first, this will give us the ability to just start typing in a list of to-do items. Okay, and then it'll import the to-do item package at the top on line 3 there. All right, great. Problem is, we don't want to actually give anybody, any other object or anything else in our application direct access to this member here. Because that breaks encapsulation. We want to protect this because that defeats the purpose of trying to control the data and making sure that when data comes in or goes out or gets deleted, that it all goes through one place so we can track down bugs and anything like that. And basically so we don't have to duplicate that logic elsewhere in our application. All right, so the to-do list is, we're going to make that private. Right? Actually, I think this is by default private. So, oh wait, no, we don't need it. Okay, so we're going to mock it private, just double checking that. But now when we want access to this object, then we actually have to like try to give it access. So we can do this in a number of ways. We can actually do a copy if we want to, but just for sake of simplicity, we're going to create an object, or excuse me, an accessor to this from a function. Now we can do like a custom get on this if we wanted to, but I'm not going to do that this way. I think I'll do that for another function class here, but let's just do, let's call it to-do list. Okay, we're going to call a function called do list. It's not going to take any parameters, and we're going to return an object of a mutable list of to-do items. All right, I always like to look at what these, of course, it's saying it's not returning one, but let's go ahead and return this first. So let's write our code first, and we'll fix any warnings or anything. And basically how I do this. So here's the return of that pretty simple function. But again, maybe you want to make a copy of this first before you pass it back. Maybe you want to filter it. Maybe you want to sort it. You know, whatever you want to do here. We now have the ability to kind of abstract that logic and take care of any other additional logic that we want to perform on this before passing it back. Maybe we have to pull this from a database. Maybe we have to pull it from a web service. This will give us the ability to cache that. So we can say, hey, is this data old? If it's old, go and grab it before we return it. All right, and usually what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and create the utility methods first before we move on so that we kind of have the basic logic down before we try to go ahead and start organizing stuff. All right, so function, we're going to add a to-do, add to-do item, pretty simple stuff, if I can spell item. And this is going to take a new item, a new to-do item. Okay, and I can mess up the formatting all I want. This is not going to return anything, so I'm just going to start the function body. And I've already messed up the formatting, so I'm just going to highlight everything, Option Command L, and hopefully that those plates banging around is not too noisy. All right, so when we add a to-do item, we're going to take this as a parameter. We're just going to add it to our list. So m to-do item list, add, and add in the to-do item. As I mentioned before, if you want to only limit it to a list of unique items, instead of making a list, we can make it a set, a mutable set. And then we'll get an error if we try to put the same object in. But those are, yeah, like what defines a unique item is a topic for another time, but essentially is a to-do item with the same title, the same object, is something with the same title, the same due date, and the same description, a duplicate. So that's really up to the logic of your application. But yeah, you can kind of make sure that we handle that logic here. And again, we're abstracting this out so that we can handle that kind of logic and not have to duplicate that throughout our application. The other thing I like to do when I'm adding these managers is I want to be able to add in multiple to-do items. So I'm going to say add to-do items with an S, and instead of taking a to-do item, we're going to take a list of to-dos, and that's going to be a, this one doesn't have to be a mutable one. This one can be a list of to-do items. And it's probably going to tell me that. Oh, it's never used. Okay. The squiggly line sometimes means that I have a what do you call it? A typo or a misspelling. So I actually do. So capitalize the do, make that little squiggly go away. If you're, if you like those types of things, Android Studio is really nice about kind of guiding you and just saying, hey, you might have spelled this wrong. Sometimes I review code and there's a misspelling in the variable, and obviously that doesn't affect the logic of it. But when I'm trying to type it out or whatnot, or try to find it and there's a typo and I mess it up. But anyway, that's always helpful. All right, so we take our to-do, and instead of adding a, let's see, so instead of adding an individual element, we can add in a list or a collection. So the collections are, let's see if I can make this window a little bit bigger for you guys. Collections are the parent class of arrays, lists, hash maps, sets, and all the other collections that you can think of. So that's what a collection is. And so you might not immediately see the ability to add in a list. And actually, okay, there's no other items. These are all the items we get. But this is the one we actually want. So add all, and then hit escape because I want to know, okay, a list of to-dos. And now that it gives us the ability, if we were to have a list, or maybe we're getting our to-dos, our list of to-dos from a web server, and that's going to give us multiple to-dos, that we don't have to call this function up here a whole bunch of times, right? Because calling functions, what happens when you call a function is it has to take the current scope, all the variables, put that onto the stack. So that's a whole bunch of move operations and memory allocation and putting that kind of that scope onto the stack, and then calling this function. And then once that function is done executing, which in this case is only one line of code, executing that one line of code and then going through all that operation to pop the current scope off of the top of the stack, and then go back on to the previous scope, which is where we came from, and then kind of basically making that scope the current scope. So hopefully you guys learned some of that stuff already. But if we can avoid calling functions, then that's what we'll want to do. Is we don't want to call the same function dozens, potentially hundreds of times. All right, so let's do this really quickly. We want one to remove a to-do. So we need a to-do to remove. This is going to be of type to-do item. This is an individual item. We won't go too deeply into this, but we do kind of want all the functionality to remove one item, a bunch of items, etc. All right, so on our to-do list, we can say remove, and we can remove the to-do to remove, to-do to remove. All right, so this gives us the ability to do all of these things. And maybe we want to put in some comments or something, right? But I'll leave that for a different time. All right, so I think we have enough functionality here to start building out our list. So let's do that. So let's pretend we have a bunch of to-dos, which we'll probably have to create a default list of to-dos and then go from there. So in our, let's see what we want to do here. All right, let's launch this. I guess it's already running. Hit play. All right, so here's a basic application. Has a slide drawer here. We can hit gallery, since this is the gallery fragment. Hit home. This is the home fragment and the slideshow. So we've covered fragments already, but we'll cover it really quickly. So we only have one activity in this entire application, right? It's our main activity. But we have different screens within that activity, and these are the fragments. So as I kind of pull this off, this is within our activity, but within our activity, we have these different views that we can swap in and out. Okay, so maybe, and we also have this menu over here. If you didn't see it, that's a little settings menu. It doesn't do anything. Sometimes it launches a toast at the bottom. This one actually, I think, launches a snack bar item. It says replace with your own action. We'll get to that in a second. But let's change our home. We're not going to change anything with the menu item, but when we select home, it says this is home fragment. We want to change that and actually add in a list of our to-do items. All right, so we have to find this fragment, and let's pretend you don't know where it is, but you do know that there is this piece of text here. This is home fragment. So let me show you another feature. Command Shift F. This will bring in a find, kind of search all type thing. And what did I say that was called? This is home fragment. So I'm going to type in, this is home fragment. And you can see this is where this is set within the code. It's actually within a view model. And our view model is going to be the model for the view. And the view is going to be contained within the fragment. And the fragment is going to be contained in our main activity. So it's a whole bunch of, big hierarchy here. But again, if you're not familiar with where this particular piece of code is or how this is getting displayed, if you know a little bit about something like the name of this label here, then you can find out where the code is for that particular piece of text. All right, so we're not going to change anything in here because I want to go back up to the fragment and start changing its layout so that we can put a recycler view, which is going to be our list of to-dos. So just based on this piece of information, I know that this model here is inheriting from our base class view model. So I can actually jump to any instance that is using this class. So holding down the command key and clicking, it will give me a drop down of everywhere that this is being used. So we're declaring it in home fragment on line 15 and in home fragment. Hopefully you can see that on the stream. It's not too small, I think. You can see the line of code where home view model exists, as well as also what it looks like where it's being declared. So this will jump us to that line of code either way. And let me hit Command 5 to get rid of, do that twice to get rid of the debugger. And so now we're in the home fragment. So this fragment is this class, which inherits from fragment, of course. Here's our inheritance. There's a base class for this particular class here. Home fragment is going to be the code that represents the layout that you're seeing on the app here. All right, so kind of just jumping back, I didn't know where this code was. Let's pretend this is a larger code base. Again, I knew that there was this label called this is home fragment. So now I'm kind of jumping up until I'm where I want to put the code in. All right, so now I'm in the code, but as I said, I want to jump over to the layout. In almost every fragment and activity, it loads a layout file. So that's our XML file. But again, maybe I have a really long list of layouts over here on the left, and I just don't want to find it, or maybe the previous programmers named it differently, right? So so instead of trying to go through this long list and trying to figure out like what layout represents this, etc., every fragment and activity usually loads a layout. So where do we find that layout? If you find r.layout, which is usually in the Oncreate, fragments have a function called Oncreate view. So that's usually the function that we use in replacement of the activities on create. Again, just find r.layout. So in this case, the fragment the layout for the fragment is named fragment underscore home. But again, using that command clicking, I can jump over to that file. Right. So again, if you're not familiar with the large code base, or the code is new to you, or if you're like me and you just forget where you place stuff, or you don't want to navigate, this is one of the easier ways to do it. So hopefully you found that useful. All right, so here's the label that it represents this. It's obviously a text view, but we don't want to put that in there. We're going to get rid of that, so we can right-click on this, get rid of it, delete it somewhere, wherever the delete is, or I'm just going to hit the delete key like I normally do. I don't know if there was a delete option in there. I'm sure there was, but I didn't want to figure it out, so I just hit delete on it. It's way easier. All right, and so the next thing we want to do is create a recycler view for this. What I like to do is have Android Studio do that for me, though. So I'm going to go up to the package, right-click, new, go all the way down to Fragment, and we're going to do a fragment of type list. So you can do one that's blank, which is essentially what we have here already. We can do one with lists that we're interested in. We do one with a view model, which we put all of the data or models that we need to have represent on the view into the view model, and kind of have the view model control the data that goes up on the screen or up on the view, etc. So we're just going to go and do a fragment list. And we want to fill out this kind of wizard-like thing. I'm going to expand this so you see all the options on one screen. And it's going to ask, what kind of object do you want to display? So we already have one. So I'm going to say to-do item. And this is going to create a list for us and put it into a to-do item fragment. And this is going to include a fragment factory methods. I don't usually like to put this within here because I don't really need an object to create my to-dos because I already created the to-do manager. So I'm going to click that off. And then the column count, is it one column? Is it two columns, etc.? If we do more than two, then it's going to be a grid. We're just going to keep it simple. Object content layout file name. So basically, what's the layout file that we're going to have that is going to represent our list and all the items within that list? And then what is the list layout file name? Oh, sorry, I got those backwards. So the this view that's highlighted, it will represent an individual row within our list, and then this is what I mentioned before, it's the entire list with all of our items. And then the adapter class name, I hate when it says my. You just delete the my and just do a to-do item recycler view adapter. And this is really nice because if you name it appropriately, then you will you'll be able to reuse this list throughout your application, because again, it's a fragment. We can take this fragment, put it into an activity. We can put it into another fragment if we wanted to. We can nest fragments if we need to. And of course, our source language is Kotlin. So let's go ahead and finish that up. All right, so you can see the files that it created for me. I would have to do this manually, so that's not fun. I can add that to our Git repository. And now you can see a preview of our list view, or excuse me, our to-do list, or excuse me, one more time, our to-do item list. All right, again, this is a fragment. So we can actually swap out the fragment that is being used within that sidebar there. So give that a shot. I'll show you how to kind of swap that up for your own stuff. Or we can include this fragment in the home fragment if we wanted to. I'm just kind of thinking how I want to do that. But yeah, let's go ahead. Yeah, so let's do this. Let's change this from a constraint layout. You can keep it a constraint layout if you want to, but I'm going to change the type. Show you another kind of useful tip here is I can change this from a constraint layout to basically whatever I want. In this case, I'm going to do a frame layout because I'm just going to stick the one fragment in this. So that changed it to a frame layout. And now I can put in another container. I can stick in a recycler view. I can do all that stuff manually. You can see we can add in a whole bunch of other items in here. But the one I want to do is include a sub fragment, and I'm just going to simply click and drag that down into our component tree, put that under a frame layout. Frame layouts are really nice because basically they only contain one item. All right, so when I drag in fragments, it's going to ask me which fragment I want to include in this. So database connection where fragment accesses database, yes. We will do that. Let's see. So the to-do item fragment, which is the one we just created, we'll put that in there. Yeah, so we can back this with a, let's use an object box. So we got another hour, so we can probably back it with the database. Let's just get this working first. Let's see, what's this error? So I just clicked on the exclamation point, place the fragment tag with fragment container view. Okay, sure, yep, fix. And we got a IDE error. Let's go ahead and submit that to Google. All right, let's go ahead and compile this because make sure everything works. Oh yeah, we broke our, so I deleted that text view. So now it's having issues finding the text view and then also setting the text view using the view model. So let's just go ahead and comment that out for right now. Control D to compile debug. And sometimes Android Studio does this. I don't know why. So it said down here in the bottom, it says install successfully finished in 769 milliseconds. However, didn't actually run the application. So sometimes it does that, but it doesn't actually run it. So we just have to hit it one more time. Make sure that the debugger is waiting for the app to launch. Oh, okay. So now it crashes. That's fine. We go over to Logcat, see what the crash is. And I think I know why. Here's the issue right here. But I'm going to scroll up to the top and see what the actual stack trace is. So usually if there's any issues with your app, I will ask you, hey, what is the stack, or you say my app is crashing, what's the stack trace look like? So let's read this. So we have a couple exceptions here that we're not handling. So binary XML file on line 9 of fragment home has an error inflating a certain class fragment container view. Binary XML file line 9, kind of the same error. So we know that we have an error on XML, which is our layout file on line 9. So we'll get to that in a second. Yeah, this is kind of what I was thinking. It's because, this is caused by this is caused by this, is because inside of my main activity, I must implement on list fragment interaction listener. So if you've watched me do this before, I sometimes forget to implement that interface. I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And you can see that when we go to attach the to-do item fragment, so that part's actually working, so that's great. And you'll see that we need to handle this down here. But I'm going to click on this because this is where the exception is actually getting fired off. So click on that until it jumps to our code. So on line 52, just in case you don't see it, you can see that it's highlighted in the gutter. And we have a runtime exception that we can throw. And we can actually give it a string name. Yeah, yada, 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 toString, must implement that. And so that's the error we're seeing. That context toString is this guy down here. So if you're trying to track down anything, or you want to put any asserts in your code to just make sure that everything's working fine, or even if you're doing logging and you want to see where this issue is happening, you can do context toString. There's a couple other kind of tips like that I can share if you guys are interested. But again, we're crashing. We're having an exception on this line, line 52. So if we go back through our stack trace, basically going back down the stack, this makes it really easy because it's highlighted in blue, whereas all of the Android specific code that we don't necessarily have access to is highlighted in gray, even though we can jump over to it. Some of this code is open source, so we can jump to it. Sometimes it's compiled, so it doesn't make sense. But here's where it's actually getting called from. So when I am inflating the home fragment, it's including that fragment, which is we already set up. It's a nested fragment. And then inside that nested fragment, on create view, and then yada yada was throwing that exception. And again, the exception is because we're not implementing the interface. So how do we implement the interface? Well, we've covered this before, but we'll cover it again because this review is the and I highlighted it. Let me pull it back on strings or on screen so you can see what I'm talking about. And I don't know why this little drop-down menu just is persistent, right? That came from the debugger window. I don't know why it's still there. It's stuck. Let's see if I can. I don't know why I can't resize my window. Yeah, see, it's still there. Doesn't matter. It doesn't really bother me. All right, so here's the list of that. It's an interface that we have to implement, and this is actually defined back in our fragment. Doesn't really matter where it is. I can show you if you guys are interested. Let me know. But just trust me that it's implemented in that new fragment that we created. So put a comma after the base class that we're inheriting from. Type it in. It'll say, I don't know where you're getting this from. Do you mean this package? Yes. Alt, enter. And we have that here. So just using the autocomplete will help there. I just kind of gave it a hint of what I wanted, and here's the full package name. All right, so then the next error is we're saying that we're implementing the interface, but one of the functions within that interface is required. So this is letting us know that we now have an error because we are not implementing that interface. So if we pop over this, this gives us a tooltip. We can say implement members. There's a little light bulb, couldn't think of the name, where we can also do the light bulb as well. Sometimes if it doesn't pop up, you can hit the arrow keys, and here's the red one, and we can say implement members. Hopefully you can see that on the stream. But anyway, either way you want to go. I like the tooltip these days. Or there's a little shortcut that says Option, Shift, Enter. So Option, Shift, Enter, or you can just click the little implement members, and it brings up the implement members window here. So it's going to tell you all of the members that we need to implement. I can make this a little bit bigger. And it's accepting a dummy item. We need to change that in a second. And if we go ahead and call this to-do function is kind of like an assert, but if this ever gets called, it'll crash our app. I can prove that really quickly. Do a debug. So Control D. Went ahead and crashed. If you didn't see that really quickly. If we scroll up, we'll have a slightly different error. Okay, so it's the same error. Let's put a breakpoint there really quickly. We should be implementing the code or implementing the interface. Should see a slightly different error. All right, let's just go ahead and take this out. We'll just put a log statement here. Put it into a string, of course, called list frag interaction. Maybe we're doing this in the wrong class. Oh, yes, we are. Sorry. We're doing this in the wrong class, I think. Yeah, sorry. So your main activity must implement that. I was putting in the wrong class. So let's cut that out, go over to our main activity. I wasn't paying attention. And our home fragment doesn't need to implement this. Our main activity needs to implement this. I'm going to highlight everything, Option Command L, change up the formatting a little bit. Main activity. Highlight everything, Option L. See, it changed our formatting just a hair. For this one, because we included code, it imported the code that we needed to include for the package that we were using. Now you can see we have a bunch of bad imports, and if I went ahead and committed this as a project, we just get a whole bunch of really messy imports. So I'm going to do Control Option O, and that reduced it down to what's that, seven imports. All right, so now I think it should be working. But that's how we track down errors. Make sure you read your error messages, because obviously it's telling you what's wrong. It was saying that the main activity needed to implement the interface, not the home fragment. All right, so we're keeping our home fragment, but again, we've created another fragment within that fragment. So it's, I could have done it a different way. I could have replaced the home fragment with a list view. This gives us a little bit more flexibility. But yeah, now we have a list item. I haven't really customized this, obviously, but it should have about 25 items in it, I think. Yep, 25 items, starting at 1. It just kind of gives us the ability to add multiple items. If we go over to gallery real quick, you can see it's on a different fragment. So this is the preferred way of developing Android apps, where essentially you can have multiple activities, but a lot of the time, because 90% of my applications are not huge applications. Most of the time I will have an app of maybe 1, maybe 2 or 3, depending upon what I'm doing, 2 or 3 activities within one application. I like to try to keep one activity that kind of controls them all. So if I'm doing something like this, where it is a sidebar, like a side menu application, then yeah, it's literally only one activity. Sometimes I'll put in 2 if I want to kind of pop something up on the screen that takes up the entire screen. I might want to do that. And so let's actually go ahead and do that, because now that we have the ability, well, let's do that in a second, but now that we have the ability to add in a list, right? I want to be able to add my own items into this list. So now that we know this was working, I just took a screenshot by hitting Command S by accident. It's kind of one of those like reflexes where you just hit Command S all the time because you want to save your code. Nice, let me get rid of this log window here. All right, so let's take a look of what Android Studio created for us, if we can find it. All right, so here's a dummy folder, and it has an object called dummy content. And this is the same thing as the to-do manager that we created before. We have an object, so there's only one that exists. It has a count of 25. This is going to hard code our list of dummy items so that we can put it in the list view. It has its own mutable map as opposed to a mutable list like we created. Oh, I'm sorry. No, it does have a immutable list. Yeah, this is for something else, obviously. When you go ahead and initiate or initialize the this object, this dummy content object, it will create a for loop, and it'll go from 1 to 25, and just create those items for us. It has its own add item, right? So we have all this functionality besides the dummy item creation. We have all this functionality already. So we're actually going to swap this out for our version, and we don't have the default creator, but again, I'm going to give the user the ability to add their own to-do items. And then in the future, we'll pull that data from a web service, and then setting up like a quick Node.js server, like an Express or a Sales.js web server that we can actually just push data to, and it'll just spit it back out to us. It's pretty easy to do. I might set that up if you guys are interested in that, but yeah, let's go ahead and swap this out. So let's find our, where did it create? Under here. Okay, to-do fragment. Here is the to-do fragment that is going to create our list view, and also basically just creates our list view. That's really all it does at the moment. Creates the list view and then sends it data. So okay, so here it is. If the view, if the root view of to-do item fragment is a recycler view, so if you actually nest the recycler view into another view or another layout, this will stop working. Just keep that in mind. I'm not really sure why this is, but I guess it's just a quick check to say, hey, is the view a recycler view? If so, do it. And if you break it, then it's not going to try to operate on this item. So you can change this around. I often have to change this and say maybe view dot, whatever the ID is of the recycler or the recycler views layout, et cetera. Again, if you're nesting it, but keep that in mind because I've run into that and it took me way too long, like 15 or 20 minutes to realize, oh yeah, I nested it, therefore it broke this connection. We have the layout manager within that. We're asking how many columns do you have. If there's one column, we're going to use a linear layout for the list. And if it's greater than, or basically it's not 1, so usually it's greater than, it's not going to be 0. But in that case, if it's anything other than 1, we're going to use the grid layout. And again, that comes back to the columns that we have. If it's more than one column, we make it into a grid layout. So that's all the code handles there. But the adapter is really the important part of our list view. So our list view is going to need a list to view. Okay, all of that makes sense, but if not, but here's our to-do view adapter that we created, or excuse me, our list, a list item, to-do list, to-do item, recycler, view, adapter. I never like speak these out loud. I just look at them in code. But saying it is a mouthful, but I like to have long variable names anyway. It is populating it with the items within our dummy content. If you remember, our dummy content is essentially just a list of items and dummy items in this case. And so we want to swap this out with our, what did I call it again? I can't think and talk at the same time sometimes, our to-do manager and its list. So all I have to do is just swap this out, to-do manager dot, this works pretty much the same thing. We just didn't call it items. We called it, what did we call it? To-do item? Oh, to-do list. Staring right at it. All right, there we go. Okay, so what's the problem here? Just hover our mouse over. We found that it's requiring a list, and we're passing back a mutable list. Well, a list, or excuse me, a mutable list is just a list. It's a type of list. So instead of passing back a mutable list, which we probably shouldn't have done, let's refactor this a little bit. I'm going to jump over to that code really quickly by holding Command and clicking on the function, which will bring me to that function within here. And you can see that it is returning a list, the mutable list, I should say. Now, if we want to just say, hey, just return a list, we can try to do that. So now the return type is a list. So you would think, hey, maybe this is working. We'll get a little light bulb. It says to, I don't know what it wants to do there. Now I'm going to hit Command left square bracket a couple times until it jumps back. It's kind of like a back button on here. All right, so now it works, except it's now looking, instead of passing back a mutable list, because again, in the hierarchy of inheritance, a mutable list is of type list, right? It just has additional functionality for adding, removing items, right? That's why I always want to use non-mutable list, because it's a lighter weight class. It has fewer overhead in terms of functions and members, but also a memory footprint. So that's also the difference between val and var in Kotlin. Now for this, you can see that what is required is a list dummy content.dummy item, and what it found, what we're trying to pass in, is a list of to-do items. This is what we want, but we have to do a little bit of refactoring within this view adapter, because the view adapter is expecting some dummy content items. So holding down Command and clicking on the class, it'll jump us over to the class as long as you don't click and move the mouse. So sometimes my mouse is a little messed up. It's a wireless mouse, but anyway, sometimes it messes up, but just click until you get into our class. So it jumps over to our class. Now, if you look, let's see, somewhere down here, I can see it right off the top here, is it's expecting a dummy item here, as well as here, and let's see where else, here. So we're defining members within our class, not within the body of the class, but as in the constructor. And this is a really nice way that Kotlin enforces instantiating a class with variables here, with values. And so the constructor is built into the declaration of the class. So you might like that, you might not like it, but it's kind of cool. I appreciate it. Gives you kind of a nice ability to instantiate this class right off the bat. All right, so in instantiating, like we showed you, let me hit Command left square bracket again. I can jump back, and you can see when I instantiate this class, it's asking for a list of to-do items, dummy content in our case, and then a listener. So let's jump forward, Command right angle bracket or end angle bracket, whatever you want to call it. And you can see that's where those parameters come from in our initializer for our class. So on this one, we're doing an on list fragment interaction listener, which we already implemented in our main activity. That's kind of where we were having the issues with our exception being thrown, etc. So what I need to do is I need to change the type of dummy item to our type of to-do item. Okay, so hopefully this is making sense of how I kind of go through the code, recognize what the errors are, going through the stack trace, debugging if I need to, making sure functions are getting called, because sometimes if you miss a step, like if I forgot to put in the Android manifest file the new overridden application, etc., then it doesn't work, doesn't call that function, and my app, just by running it, I don't know that anything is wrong or what's not working. So make sure that you're walking through the code and making sure what you think is the value is actually the value, or that the functions that you think are getting called are getting called. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So we're changing out the list from the dummy items to our to-do items, because that's what we want to do. And so now we're going to have to refactor everywhere in here. But here's another tip for you guys, is I can hit Command R, which is not run, that's Control R. This will do a search and replace. So everywhere that you see dummy item, I don't know if you can see that on stream, but it's up here in the top left-hand corner, it says dummy item. I am going to replace that with my to-do, but I always make typos, so I'm just going to copy the to-do item class, put it as a replacement, paste that in. It'll jump to the next instance of that, and I'm just going to hit replace. You can do replace all if you're feeling lucky. And it says, let's see, it shows 2 matches, which is over here. So I can jump over to the next instance. And if I try to replace this is not going to work, but I can do it anyway. It'll give me an error, and then I can delete it. And then as part of the comment here for my class, which is really nice, it's kind of like a Java doc type thing, where when we hover over the class, we can actually get this tooltip to pop up based on the comments that we have up here. So certainly we want to make sure our comments are correct, so we're going to replace that as well. And anytime you put anything within the comments of a header, whether it's a class header or a function header, put it into square brackets. It will kind of treat that as a class name. And then when the pop-up comes up, we can actually click on that as like a hyperlink. Let me show you what this looks like in a second here. But I'm going to make sure we get all of our dummy items out of our list. So now you can see we have no matches. And so now we're going to have some compile errors because we changed it from a dummy item that had an ID. Now this is going to be broken. So I'm just going to do to-do. I'm going to do the title. And for the content, we're going to do the to-do description that we already defined. And these are just 2 strings, and that's fine because this is expecting a text item, and text is of type string. And let's go ahead and just do a quick build on this, just again, making sure everything's working. Yep, as I mentioned, this would give us an error. That's fine because we don't want that. Let's go ahead and delete that. Let's hit Control Option O to clean up our imports. And if you want, you can hit Command A or Control A, and then Alt Option Command L to formatting. Let's double click on this error. I think that should be fine. Let's give it another debug build run. Okay, so the listener in this case, if we hover over this, is expecting that dummy item. We can actually go through the entire application, and what's probably easier is to keep that dummy content class and then refactor from there, but whatever you want to do. So let me jump into this on fragment interaction definition. So just command click, and again, it's expecting a dummy item. So I'm just going to do to-do item. There's probably a slightly faster way of doing this. But again, let's give it another compile. Got another error. I don't know why it just doesn't give me all of the errors in the first place. And one more time. This is expecting dummy content.dummy item. That's because that dummy item is defined within that class. All we have to do is just change this to do item. All right, so that was a little bit tedious. So went through that pretty quickly. I think that's all we have to change. Probably done that like a couple dozen times in my life. I don't always remember everything, but again, the compiler, use the IDE to your advantage to do all the searching for you. Kind of makes your life easier that way. All right, so now we got this working. Because we don't have any items instantiated on the start, now you can see that it's empty, which is fine. So just don't be too surprised when you see something like that. But what I am going to do is I'm going to instantiate my own items just really quickly. I'm going to jump over that class. I'm just going to, Command O, and I'm just going to type in to do. Find my manager. You can type in manager. Maybe that's a little bit easier. And we can actually create our own init function or initializer when we go ahead. When the application starts and instantiates the to-do manager, this will get called. So again, we can say to-do item, and we can basically just copy over what was in the dummy content. It has a for loop, and maybe I'll just do that. So copy this, hit Command left bracket to jump back, paste that in. I'm actually not going to import all this stuff because we're going to use don't want to mess up my imports. So the count, I'm going to just hard code this because save time, but obviously you want to create a constant. Our add item, we're going to add a to-do item, replace that function call because I named mine slightly different. And then instead of creating a dummy content item, I am going to use the initializer of our data class because we already went through all that trouble to create the data item. And you can see the initializer, or the class constructor, or the object constructor, is being pulled up in the tooltip. Speaking of tooltips, I promised I would show you what that looked like for the adapter. Let's just do this really quickly. Let's just do title, description, to do date. So this is expecting a type date, so I'm just going to put it in right now by calling this. It's going to ask me to import that. It's a little finicky sometimes, and make sure that we're using the Java util, not the Java SQL. So it imports that. And then the last item was the weight, which was a integer. And I don't know, let's just do 1 for right now. Actually, let's do the I. So the I represents the index in our for loop. Okay, so again, we are using our own class functions to instantiate these functions. So this says, this tooltip here is function add to do item could be private only because I'm calling this function within our class, but I do want to use this outside, so I'm going to ignore that function right now. We're just not done with our application. So you can see all the warnings within this gutter. So I usually like to go through this gutter on the scroll bar and see all the warnings so I can clean those up. They're also in the build feedback. When we get those, you can see all the warnings as well. All right, so I promised I would show you the tooltip for the view controller, or excuse me, the recycler view adapter. And that is in our fragment. I don't see the fragment, so I'm just going to go Command O and just type in fragment. And to do item fragments, what I was looking for. So here's our to-do item recycler view adapter. So if I hold down Command and I don't click, I just hover, you can see that this is the tooltip that pops up. So we can jump back if we want to. All right, so let's see. So I showed you that. All right, let's see if this is working now. So basically, we just duplicated the dummy content item that was in there. All right, sure enough, we have just static data now for title and description. All right, so now we click on something, nothing works. Just make sure we're not paused in our debugger. Great. So yeah, we click on through this, but we can also scroll up and down. You can see when I click, it says call list frag interaction. That was the string that I put in as a log statement in that. So if you don't know where that is, you can copy that code or copy that string, hit Command Shift F, and it'll automatically fill in what you have highlighted. You can jump right to that code. So what I want to do is I want to either create a to-do item, or I want to display a to-do item that already exists with the potential of editing that to-do item, right? So what we're going to do is create an activity for this that we can pop up because it's going to take up the full screen. We'll make sure that the user is focusing on their task, and so we're going to use an activity for that. So when they click on this, it will give you the to-do item that they clicked on, which is really nice. And again, this on-list fragment interaction was that interface that we implemented that we're getting the exception for. So for this one, first we're going to create the activity that we need. So let's go click on this, click new. Let's see, activity, and it gives us a whole ton of activities where we can pop this up. What I want to do is create a activity with a fragment, and that fragment has a view controller, or excuse me, a view controller. That's iOS, a view model that's behind this. So it's going to say, hey, you want this to be called main activity? No, I want this to be called to-do item activity. It's going to add an activity, or excuse me, it's going to add a to-do item, or it's going to edit a to-do item. So you can name it something if you want to that reflects that, but I'm just going to say to-do item activity. The layout name for this is to-do item activity. Builds that off of the camel case, so make sure you're following the conventions. It'll automatically translate your layout files to underscores, or underbars as some people call it. And because we already have a to-do item fragment, it's going to put 2 on there. So maybe I am going to, yeah, let's do this. Let's do, as part of the naming convention, we're going to put CRUD. So create, read, update, or delete. So maybe on the to-do, we actually do want to show a detailed view of it with all the different data points that we don't show in the list. So let's do CRUD on that. I named it in kind of the camel. So there's 2 kind of schools of thought on camel case. One is all the acronyms are, if it's an acronym, it's all capitalized. But in Android, acronyms, only the first letter is capitalized. So what happened is it put underscores between each one, which I don't want because that looks super ugly. So yeah, so CRUD is spelled with lowercase, and so now it kind of keeps that underscore stuff. Yeah, just follow the conventions of Android and you'll be much more happy. I think all these other names look good. It is not a launcher activity. We're going to put in the package, fragment package path. Okay, great. Let's go to finish. Add those to Git. All right. So now we have a fragment for the CRUD. And we're going to jump over to its layout, but let's pretend I don't know where that is. And I'm going to command click into the fragment. All right, so here's where we're going to have our layout for adding a to-do. So quickly, I'm just going to go ahead and delete what's there. This is a constraint layout. We'll ignore that for the moment. We're going to drag in a couple of text views here. Text views, text views, text views. Now you can see those just all go up to the top left-hand corner, which is not necessarily what we want, But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a title, a description. And actually, now that I think about this, I don't want a text view. I want if you go over to text, multi-line text is probably, just think of what I want for the description, because that's going to be a longer field, right? So let's do multi-line text, which is technically an edit text. Oh, actually, what am I doing? I want that for all these. Plain text. So all of them need to be edit texts. I was just thinking what type of edit text we want. So title and description, there's just text. And then the date, we're going to handle this, maybe we'll do this offline, but we can actually put in a date field here. Yeah, because there's date formatting and everything, which isn't too difficult, but it's kind of tedious, so maybe we'll just leave that off. All right, so the constraint layout, we can lay this out with constraints if we want to, or if you're lazy and you just want to get this working, we can convert the constraint view to a linear layout, and this will put it as default to a horizontal, so make sure that the layout is selected. Go over to your inspector, your attributes here if you don't see it. If I minimize this, this is just a little tab here on the right. Open this back up and change it from the orientation here to vertical. So now we got our name. Let's change this. We actually want to take out the text for this and use a placeholder instead. If you don't see it, you can actually search for it. Placeholder. Oh, sorry, it's called hint. I was working in another application that does the same exact thing, and that one's called placeholder. So this one's called hint. And let's see, to do title. You can use this in place of labels, but once you start typing in, it loses the context of what's actually in there. So labels are still good, but I'll just show you this, how to do this. This is the description, so to do description. And then this was our date. Let's type in due date. Doesn't have to be a date. It can be some descriptor that tells you what you should be working on or what you put in there. All right, so if we go, it's going to X out this filter so I can show everything again. And now hint shows up there. Now, this is only taking up roughly half the screen for some reason. It's wrapping the content, but we want to have the width fill the parent or match the parent. We'll just do that for everything. Just type in match. And match. All right, so these are a little bit too close together. We'll make sure those, especially with the description here, we want to make sure that's a little bit larger. So we're going to change the margin. So just scroll down to layout margin. It's not margin. If you scroll up too far, it's not margin, it's layout margin. If I can find L. LLL, there it is. Layout margin. Could use your search if you want to, kind of filter it really quickly. So the top margin, let's put in, I don't know, 32 dips. The bottom, 32 dips. And so that gives you a little bit of spacing on that. Now, what I would normally do is actually apply a style to this so that I don't have to go through every single text view and say, okay, the margin, 32 dips, bottom, 32 dips. You can actually create a style and then set the margins for this text box or this text view style, and that way it'll always apply. And that way, if you change it from 32 to, I don't know, 16 or whatever, then you don't have to go through all this again and change it. And I probably should do that right now, but I'm already done. Nice, just giving a little bit of space there. Okay, so we need some way to save it. I'm just going to put in a button real quick. So this will cover buttons, text views, all sorts of fun things. And let's see. Oh yeah, we have hard-coded references all over the place. Let's call this save button because we want to refer to it in code, and also place a listener on it. So when somebody clicks on it, we save that to-do. All right, so if you're adding a to-do, these fields are blank. If you're editing or viewing a to-do, these fields will be filled in, and then if you edit it, you want to save it. So we can handle all the logic for that, but let's just get this working for right now. So this one, I actually want to set up all these IDs so we can fill these in or get the values out of them if we're saving it or creating it. So this one is, let's just call it to-do title text view. Actually, it's an edit text, not a text view. And I'm going to save that, copy that, so that I can just save myself some typing. Third item, paste, and this is the to-do date. All right. Save button already has an ID. It's going to give me some warnings over here because we've hard-coded these values instead of putting it into the strings resource file. In the interest of time, we'll bypass that. All right, so this is essentially how you should architect most of your applications, is having one central repository where all this data gets saved back into. We're not going to put the logic to create the to-do in this activity. We want to just pass it to either a factory, or we're just going to pass it to the manager, and it's going to create it. So we're going to do that right now. So in this to-do items controller, it's in the fragment, of course. The Crud one, not the other one. Kind of have a naming thing there. All right, so on create of this view, when we hit that save button, we want to collect the data out of the text views, or the edit text in this case, collect it out of there, and then pass it to the manager in order to have it construct the to-do and pass it in there. So I'm going to actually do this in the onActivityCreated. And some of this stuff I should probably use the view model for, but to keep it simple, we want the save button. So I can just type in save button. It just gets it automatically for me. Save button, set on click listener. Make sure you use the Lambda version of this. And what happens when you click that save button? So we're going to pull out the title. So to-do title. That is going to equal to the to-do title text edit dot text, and you can see it passes back an editable object. So if you're using implicit classes or types in Kotlin, you can see that the IDE is going to show that the compiler is going to set this type to editable. We don't actually want that. We want to do toString on this. And that way you can see the type is string. Okay, we're going to do the same exact thing. Actually, I'm just going to type this out. To do description. That is going to be to do description title X, text, oops, not tag text dot toString. All right, and then we're going to do the same thing for the date. To do date equals to do date edit text, edit the editable from the text, and then toString. And this will give me a string version of the date. And again, we could, but don't, if you're following along, we could do this where we construct a to-do item based on the to-do title that we just grabbed, the to-do description, and the date, right? I'll just type in dates and get that. grab the right one, of course, etc. All right, of course, that's a string and not a date, so it's going to give me an error. So don't do this because, yeah, we're grabbing the string out of it, but this is a date type, so we actually want the manager to handle all of that formatting for us, so we don't have to do a date formatter here, and then, yeah, it's kind of annoying if you have date formatters all over the place that basically do the same thing. So we're not going to do this. Instead, what we're going to do is ask our to-do manager to do this for us. And so we can pass in new to-do items, but again, we don't have a way of adding these string types. So we have to create that. So let's go ahead and control click into this. Maybe do it down here. Function add to do item. We're going to overload this function call and just pass in strings here. So to do title string, to do description string, to do date. That is of type string, but we're going to convert it to a date. And we can reuse our to-do item here. But before we do that, we're going to get that date. It's going to be of type date. I'm going to be explicit about this. And we're going to say, hey, date class, do you have the ability to take a string and convert that into, and if not, it'll give us an error. So let's pretend that works. It's not what I would normally do, but I'm just showing you maybe how you would you'd go about some of this like type conversion and do it in one spot rather than all over the place. So add to do item, and then we're going to add in a to do item. So actually, let's construct that really quickly. New to do item is going to equal to do item constructor. Okay, so now we're going to pass in that to do title, that to do description, and then the due date, which we just created. Let's see, we got a little red squiggly. We're missing the priority. That's what's giving us the error. We didn't pass in the priority, so we can actually ask for the priority. Let's say to do priority, but I don't always want to put that in. Priority, I gotta spell priority right. This is of type int, as I mentioned, but we're going to set this as a default value to, let's say 9, depending on how you want your priority stuff to work. So I don't have to pass that in because that's a default value, but our constructor needs it. So we're allowing the user to actually pass in fewer parameters, and I can actually like do string, and if the to-do date, let's see, like if the to-do date is blank, or is that, let's do blank. If it's blank, if you're passing me a blank to-do list, then let's refactor this a little bit. This will be a variable instead of a value. Our due date is going to be, let's see, curly braces. Our due date is going to just be today's date. Or maybe like today's date plus 1 day or something, I don't know. Or maybe there is no due date, and that's fine too. Again, it depends on your logic. Okay, let's pretend, I'll show you another trick here. Let's pretend I've put in my curly braces, but now I want to refactor and move this line of code up. I could put my cursor anywhere on that line, hit Command Shift and up. Or if you didn't want the indentation automatically, you can do Alt Shift up, and that will preserve the indentation that it originally had. But I want to have it follow the indentation, so Command Shift up, and that will indent it for me as I move through the stuff here. All right, so just handling different cases. Again, this is being a little bit more robust in managing our data, sanitizing our data, making sure that the values that are being input by whomever's using the application, like developer-wise, we're making sure that the data that goes in is not garbage. Garbage in, garbage out. Now we're going to sanitize that so that we're not putting in bad data. So a little bit of cleanup. I could spend all day on this one, but yeah, so we've already had the priority set here. We don't really need the description. Like the description can be empty. The to-do, the title needs to be, at least give me a title. Because I think when you're doing to-do apps, right, like you might just say, go get bread, and you don't want a description for that, nor do you want a due date. So again, you're kind of making this a little bit more robust for other developers that are on your team and making sure that they don't have to duplicate all this sanity check and stuff like that. So hopefully that makes sense. Add to-do item. Now we can add that to-do item. Oops, sorry, this is a function, not a class. New to-do item, boom. And again, if we have any other stuff that we want to handle when we're adding this stuff in here, then we can handle it in this function. We don't have to duplicate it. Okay, so that should be good. Yeah, when you add a to-do item, we're just giving, you can add it as raw data, you can add it as items, and actually if we want to enforce the fact that we do not want anybody ever creating to-do items, we can make this private. By default, everything is public. I don't know why. So we have to mark things as explicitly private. Oops. My mouse is messed up. Okay. I'm going to assume everything I explained was crystal clear, and I did such a good job that you all understand it without question. So pat myself on the back. If you ask questions, then I'll know I'm not. Anyway, okay. All right, let's get this working. Enough talk, right? You guys don't want to hear me talk. We want to see me do. All right, so first of all, we need to display that activity. We have no way of displaying that activity. I'm going to reuse this button down here. This is our floating action button, which just displays this the snack bar that pops up there. It's a bar. I don't know why they call it a snack bar. Android's very snack dessert oriented. So we're going to jump over to that. Let's pretend I didn't know where that is. Again, we're going to do Command Shift F to do a full search, and I'm going to type in snack bar. We got 2 hits on this, luckily, not too many. I'm going to hit the down arrow, and we're going to jump here, and we can see that we have our floating action button inside our main activity. Okay, so I knew what that was, but in case you didn't, or in case you're working with a larger code base, or again, if you're like me and you just forget what you name things or whatever, you can jump right there. So you can either double click in there, it'll kind of open up in the main. So instead of a snack bar, if you ever want to use this, it's snackbar.make. You give it the text that you want to display. You give it the length that it's going to show for. In this case, it's length long. There's also length short. We set the action, and we don't do anything in that with that action, and then we show it. I always forget to do .show. Like, why is my snack bar not working? Where my toast is not working? You gotta do .show. Okay, so we're gonna, again, get rid of this. But when we click on the floating action button, which is the FAB, we have a set click listener, so this is going to be what gets called. And if you remember back when we launched activities, we're going to create a value, intent, and we're going to create a new intent. First parameter is going to ask for the context. I'm going to import that library really quickly. The context is this. It's going to work a little bit differently because we're in a click listener. We'll get to that in a second. And then what activity do we want to launch? And as I mentioned, this one was called to do item crud activity. So I'm just going to start typing that out. To do item Crud activities. Type until you see it. There it is, but that's not good enough. We need to do the : and then class.java. And this will be, Android will be responsible for constructing this activity, passing it to our activity manager, and then the activity manager is what's responsible for the activity stack, displaying the activity, calling those callbacks on create, on resume, on pause, on stop, on destroy, on start, all those things. The activity manager is responsible for all that stuff. All right, so we have an intent. Now we have to start the activity using that intent. So start activity. Activity. We don't want to do activity for result unless you want something passed back, but we're using that manager, so we don't need to get the result back in this activity or our main activity. And then we're going to pass it the intent. And that's all we have to do in this case. When this floating action button is clicked. However, I want to change that icon because it's a mail icon, or a letter icon, I should say. So I'm going to click in one of these layouts. Let's pretend I don't know what it is. I'm just going to say, oh, I'll just take the top one. Okay, that looks pretty good. Here's the button that we want, so I can double click into here. And here it is, so floating action button, has the ID floating action button, FAB. But the thing I want to change is the icon. So scroll or search within this until you see the icon, which is the source here. Just making sure it's not the tool one. Sometimes you get a wrench. That's just for the editor. So you can see that this is @Android : drawable /IC _dialog email. So that's the built-in Android icon. We have a whole bunch of icons that we can pull from the Android operating system. These change, they get added to based on the version, but we have the ability to choose different ones. So maybe I want a plus for adding. I don't know how this will look on a blue button. But we can search. We can say like add. We get more of a white one. Maybe it's not add, but like insert. There's no insert. You know, what are we adding? We're adding to-dos. Maybe this calendar one looks good. So anyway, go through this, kind of search around, see if you can find different ones. But let's just use this one for sake of time. It's a little bit too small, but that's okay for right now. So I'm just changing the icon, and we're launching the activity. I'm gonna launch the debug. Oh, we got a small error. Oh. Okay, so on our save button, we were putting this we're taking all the strings, we're passing it to the manager so it can construct the object. We did that, but we forgot to hook it up. So we're just going to say add to do, make sure we have the constructor, pass in the to do title. I'm just going to type in title, description, due date, to do date. And then it's asking for the priority, but we're not going to put that in because it's auto-filled for us, and that's all we have to do. Now if we run it, okay, here's our application. We're going to hit the floating action button. Here is our activity. We can hit the back button to get rid of that activity. It goes back to our main activity. Go back in there. We're going to hit save. None of these fields are going to be filled in, but that's okay. Let's put a breakpoint on line 39, make sure everything's working. Hit save. You can see it's going to add this. It's already ran through this code. All these are empty strings because there's nothing filled in here. It's going to go inside here so we can step into that line of code. As it goes through our code, we can step over. Our date is blank, so it's going to go ahead and create that object for us. Do the constructor, add it. I'm going to put a breakpoint here, or you can say step into, whatever you want to do. I'm going to step over that line of code, and now you can see that our array, instead of having 20 items, which is the default, it now has 21 items. So hit play, and a few things are going to happen. One, it didn't say, or it doesn't look like it saved anything, and two, it didn't dismiss it. So if we hit back, it did save it in the array, but if we scroll all the way down, you don't see the item. which is blank, so you wouldn't see it anyway, but you should see an empty row. So when I hit that button, let's do this really quickly. I'm just going to hit back until we get to the back to our code. Okay, so on that save button, we actually want to finish the activity, so call finish. And because we're in the click listener, we can do this, which is the button. Well, we could do at, and then what's this called? To do item. Fragment. To do item. I'm not sure why I have to type this all in. It should autocomplete for me. Let's just do this really quickly. So finish. And so we want to, oh, okay, I'm sorry. This isn't a fragment. So we actually want the activity. We got to call this on the activity. So my bad. So just do activity and then finish. Okay, so this one is going to say that this activity, fragments don't actually have to exist within an activity. So this is an option. This is a knowable. So it's going to, we can do the double exclamation points to make sure that that's not nullable. But it's going to ask us, hey, you should be using the require activity, which is a little bit better. So we're going to do that instead. A little bit more flexible, a little bit better. And we'll certainly get rid of that warning. All right, so now we're finishing it. But then when we come back to the main activity, this still won't work, because this is a problem that some of you guys are having, is when we come back to our main activity, what's been put into the view, our recycler view, is only what we told to put into it. And we never told it that the data that we put into it in the first place is updated. So in order to get that data to update, we can do it in a couple of different ways. The fast and easy way is to just, in our main activity, when the main activity comes back into view, so I'm going to hit Control O to get our overrides, and I'm going to type in on resume and hit down until you find just on resume. Okay, so on resume, make sure the superclass is called first. We're going to update, we're going to make sure that the adapter, I'm going to type in adapter, this is not going to work initially, but that the data set has changed. Okay, so you can see that we don't actually have a reference to the data set. So I'm going to move this not in the main activity, but into the list views fragment. So I'm going to pull this out, because the fragment has its own life cycle, right? So our life cycle for this, let's see, let's make sure I'm in the right fragment. So you can see there's the adapter. And you can also get that, let me undo that really quickly, Control O, and do on resume. There it is. So we can redo that, but I was just copying and pasting, so I'll just paste that back in. So our fragments also have the on resume, of course. And adapter, we don't have a reference to the adapter, even though it seems like we do. We have it listed here. That is, what we have to do is we're going to create a local reference to this. So we create a variable in this case. We're going to call it, let's call it to do adapter, just to be different. And that is going to be of type this class. And it's going to tell us that this needs to be instantiated. So we have a couple options here. We can make it null, or we can say, yes, it's never going to be null, but we're going to initialize it later. Not here, not on line 28, but later. So we're going to do late init modifier. So just hit that as just late init var. That's fine. It's grayed out because we never used it, but let's put it not there because we still need that variable to be set. We're going to say to do adapter. So what we're going to do is this is just a regular adapter, and the other issue is it says smartcast to that long adapter type. isn't possible because adapter, the variable, is a mutable property that could have been changed by this time. So we want to make sure that it's not changed, so we can set it as a, we can do a couple of things. We can actually typecast this instead of doing a smart cast. So I can just say as a, oops, as a to-do item view adapter, something like that. And that'll allow us to work. Or you can set a different variable that's a value and do that there, but this should be fine. The smart cast is basically trying to figure out what type it is. And what it's saying is, well, because it's an adapter and not specifically a to-do item recycler view adapter, then the type could change between line 43 and line 44. So anyway, we're not using the smart cast, and we're making sure we're doing an explicit typecast, and we're saying this adapter is of type to-do item recycler view adapter. All right, so that was a mouthful, but that's the inner workings of why that error comes up. So sometimes what I say is development is not necessarily about what you know, but how you can solve these problems and what the problems mean, and et cetera. So that is what that means. All right, so now we have the to-do adapter as a local variable. We can then say, hey, the data set has changed. So you can say notify whatever, but notify the data set has changed. And again, the data set that we're using is the to-do items list, and we've added to that list, but we have to let the view adapter know that that list has updated so it can update my list here. All right, that should be it. Okay, so we got just title, description, title, description. I'm gonna go and add a new to-do item. Buy bread, put a little emoji in there. To-do description. The date, you can put in whatever date, just making up stuff here. So that's not a date, but hopefully this doesn't crash it. If you're watching this in the future, the date is probably in the past. Okay, so we put in our breakpoint. We're actually going to get rid of that because I assume everything's working. Now when we scroll back down, we can see that we have buy bread and then the description. Of course, the description is all it's all squished up here. Let us fix that really quickly. And oh, we're going to do one more thing. So we're just trying to find the list item. Okay, so this is what the item looks like. This is our content. It gets all squished. It's wrapping the content. So the content is actually based on the original data set. We're not going to wrap the content. We're actually going to match the parent. And that should fix our problem. I took a screenshot of that instead of saving my layout. All right, and the next thing is when I click on this, nothing happens. So back in the main activity, this is what gets called, if you remember from early in the video. So I'm going to duplicate this code. It's pretty simple and it's a little bit custom, so I'm okay with that. So in new intent, we've already done this, if you remember. I'm going to type in activity, get all of our activities, activity. I don't see it at the top for some reason. Oh, probably because we didn't import it. So this is the activity we want to launch, colon, class.java, start activity. And this is what happens when we click on the row. However, as you can see, how does it know what row that we clicked on? Well, in this one, we're getting past that item. So we can actually send this item to the activity. And we do that through our intent bundle. So intent, put extra, and put that item in there. This is going to complain because only these types are acceptable. Oh, and I forgot to put the key in there. Bytes, arrays, booleans, etc. Now, I don't have an ID on my items, though I should. And when we implement the database part of it, then we will put an ID and we can pass the ID rather than the entire object. But the quick fix to this is if you look at what's being acceptable is we can put a parsable, we can put a serializable. So we can actually change one of these to serializable. So if we go click on the class, hold down Command, click, we can actually make this of type serializable. Oh, sorry, this is at the end. There we go. Okay, so we got rid of all the errors. I'm going to hit Command right, left angle bracket to jump back. And let's do a quick build, see if we that gets rid of that error. Oh, again, I forgot the value. So let's just say to-do item is the key. There we go. Now that should work. Okay, so how do we pull this out? I'm going to jump over to the activity. When the activity is created, we get this on create. Now we need to pass it to our fragment because the fragment now controls the data that we have shown here. I'm going to do this really quickly. So let's see. So if the instance state is null, meaning it's launched for the first time, we're going to have a new instance of this fragment. Put in the data class. Let me just put this as an activity for this one. So value, here's going to be a variable. Let's do a late init var. This is going to be the to-do item. To-do item of type to-do item. Got to be explicit when we're doing late init vars. All right, so if this is loading for the first time, oops, forgot to copy this. Okay, to-do item equals, and then on our intent bundle, we can get extra. I'm just going to type in extra. And this is a serializable. So we want to, let's just say get serializable extra and then pass in that key. That key is what I type in there, to-do item. Should always put these into constants just to make sure we're not making a typo because this won't work. All right, so this is a serializable. It's going, it doesn't know anything else about it besides the serializable. We need to assign that into a to-do item, so we're just going to typecast that as a to-do item. So as a to-do item, pull this out as a to-do item. And voila, that should work fine. But we need to display that in our to-do fragment. Sorry, the wrong fragment. To-do item crud fragment. So on activity created, we know the activity is created. We know that our layout is already there. We can actually do this in here, but this is only one line of code. So what we want to do is we're actually going to do val view and set this equal to this guy, and then it expects a return value. So we're going to say return, and we're just going to return that view. And then in between here, we can get the values, the text or the edit text, and set the values from here. So first of all, I'm going to get that to-do item from the activity. So let's say the title is equal to the activity dot to-do item. Now it doesn't know about it because I haven't typecast this as a to-do item crud activity. So let's typecast this as a to-do item crud activity. Now we can get that item. Not the best way to do it necessarily. We probably want to use the view model for this, but I'm just showing you one way of doing it. So now we have, let's see. Yeah, I don't want to have to keep calling this. So let's save a reference to the to-do item so we don't have to keep getting it from our activity. So I can keep a local copy of it. Now we're going to do val title to-do item dot to-do title. Okay, great. Value description equals to-do item dot description, et cetera, et cetera. So again, in the interest of time, we'll get rid of that one. And now we can fill in our title from our UI. So set the text to title. And on editables, it's a little bit different. So we have to say set text. And then inside that, we can do title. And then the description, set text. Oh, forgot to do the edit text. That's set text. And set it equal to, that wasn't necessarily the one I wanted to use, but close enough, description. And we can go on for the rest of the UI elements, but this should be good enough. Let's go ahead and test this out really quickly. All right, so I'm going to click on any one of these, and it breaks, which is fine. Not really what I was expecting, but okay, so no reference. Let's click on the line to get there. Let's put a breakpoint on line 29. I'm not sure this is getting it. And then on our activity as well, we'll make sure we're pulling that out and saving it. Okay, so we're showing this as a debug. Click on any one of these. All right, so to do item is currently null. That's fine because it hasn't executed the line of code. So we are storing, we're getting it out of the bundle, and we're storing it into the local variable called to do item, which is defined up here. Hit play or continue. So now when we do our Oncreate view, our activity, okay, our activity exists. Okay, so that looks like everything's working. So if I hover over this, you can see that this is indeed our activity that, or excuse me, our to-do that we created. Line 31. This is where, let's see, is this having the issue? I forget what line that we're having issues with. Oh, okay. So, oh, okay, I forgot. I put this in the wrong place. Okay, so let me show you this. So to do title edit text is null, and that's why we're getting the exception. And that's because I accidentally put this in the Oncreate view, and the activity, well, the view, it doesn't exist just as is. We actually have to attach it to the view, which is why I created that little variable in the first place. Okay, so initially it'll give me an error, but I just have to synthesize it by including that library, and it'll also include this one as well, or that package. So this is Kotlin's, this guy here. So the Kotlin extensions, it'll include those UI elements that we defined. And we can see that we have some unused packages. So Control Option O, clean that up a little bit. Now it should work. So I'm just going to run this. I keep saying we're going to be done for today, but I'm going to keep going until I feel like we're at a good spot where it's mostly working application. Okay, I'm going to run that one more time. I think it updated, but I wasn't paying attention. All right, so we got this one. You can click on any one of these, they're all the same. And you can see that our secondary activity is populating our field with title, description. Doesn't have the due date because I didn't fill it in here, but you could. So you can save it, or you can hit back. Let's go back into that. So that's an existing item which has pre-filled values here. You can save it as I mentioned. You can go back, and then if you create a new one, okay, so that's not working anymore. Oh, okay, because I changed the logic now so that it's expecting a to-do item. So what we need to do now is something crashed. I don't even need to look at it because I know exactly what happened. Is if we're pulling out this to-do, oh, I set this as a late init var, which could actually not be initialized because it could be null. I forgot about the use case, which is fine. Let's go back. So we're going to change this to a late init var. Again, this could be nullable. So, or yeah, nullable. So we'll go ahead and put the question mark, meaning, right? Is it nullable? We're going to initialize it to null first. We might have to do some refactoring on this, but that is okay every time we use it. So now when we go back into the fragment, it's going to say, let's see. Okay, so now this is nullable. So this changes, this won't let us just call it because this value to do title, which is what crashed a couple seconds ago, is null. And so this will crash. So we can do that to get rid of the error. But again, this could be null. So this is a dangerous check. We can also do a question mark, which will pass us back a null if this is null. So you can see the differences between these two types. Title is of type string question mark. Description is of type string with no question mark. And that's because, again, we're not doing that optional, that nullable return type. So if to-do item is null, it'll pass back null. So this is kind of a safe check. This little question mark is a safe check. But then what I'd have to do is I have to do this. And then this kind of breaks, and we can do this. And that's just, I have the question marks all over the place. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to grab the to-do item. And if it's null, if this guy is null, then we're not even going to execute this. If you're used to Java or any other language, what we could do is we can say if to-do is equivalent to null, and then wrap these guys in the null. That's fine. What happens is it still doesn't get rid of these errors for some reason. So a better way, and the Kotlin way, is to do either let, put that in there, hit escape, and then, like I showed earlier, highlight this, Alt, Shift, up arrow key, get rid of that extra curly brace, put that in there, clean this up a little bit. It changes to do to only execute this code block when to do is not null. So if it's null, it just ignores it, doesn't fill it in, and has that previous example or that previous functionality where it doesn't fill in the fields. So now we can do, what it does is it passes in a variable called it. So we can replace these all with it. Actually, let's see, do I want to do an apply? Oh, I'm sorry. We can use let or apply. What I want to do here is the saved call. Okay, sorry, my brain was not exactly thinking what I was doing. So that save call that I mentioned, it will call the rest of this if it's not null. And so now we're kind of wrapping this all in here, and now we can use the it, because now this it is not nullable, and we just use it safely and pass it in. Okay, so that was a long explanation of how to properly handle your nullables, or at least one way. So click on this. Okay, great. We saw that already. Now I'm going to create a new to-do item. All right, so crashing, that's fine. We're just not handling something appropriately. Go up the stack trace. The error is null. Something's null. Let's figure it out. Line 20 of this activity. Okay, so the intent is not null. So line 20. So I'm not passing in an intent, any intent bundles. So get serializable is going to return false. Let's see what we can do here. So extras. Let's see. What do I want to do? So I'm in the activity and intent. Let's read this error real quickly. Null cannot be typecast to non-nullable. Okay, so let's do this first. Let's create a value. Let's see, this is going to be our to-do item, and that's going to equal oops, sorry, rename this, let's see. Okay, so this is going to be a serializable type. It's a question mark, so obviously it's nullable. So we're going to do the same thing is yeah, let's do this. So many different ways to do these days. Let's move this up. And again, I know that this is, well, I don't. It's a question mark. Get rid of that question mark. So when I'm in this code block, I know that it's not nullable. So now we can say it as a to-do item. We can assign it. That should take care of that. So a little bit of advanced Kotlin for you guys. Hopefully that helps you with your own stuff. Okay, so go ahead here. So we have that breakpoint. Great. Gonna skip over all this stuff. To do is null in this case, so that should just work. And ta-da! Now we can fill in our own items, and we just have to make sure that, let's see, this to-do item, what we can do, because we have this save button, this is the last thing I'm going to do for today, I promise, is move this out as a class into the class, and this is going to be of type to-do item. This is nullable. And I will post this to the repository. Change this from a value to a var so we can make it mutable. Okay, so again, this is nullable, but we want to keep a local reference to it. Could be made private. Yes, actually, let's make that private. So what happens is if this is nullable, and we go ahead and save it, then we actually, what we could do is we could pass it back to the to-do manager if it's not null. So let me just write this out. So if it's null, which means we haven't instantiated, which is this is a new to-do item, we're going to add it to the to-do manager. If it's not null, meaning it's already been instantiated, but we've edited it, then what we want to do is set the to-do item's title, the to-do item's description, to-do item, blah, 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 its description to these different values. Set the title to just, oops. Which we're getting from up here. Oh, okay. So I know what's going on. So it's actually, when we did the data class, I was wondering where that was getting that from. So if we, the to-do item, the data class, these variables are not mutable, they're values. So I'm trying to change the values here so we can change all these to vars, which is why it was giving us some issues. And that's fine. Okay, command left bracket, go back. And then these are nullable, so if it's null, don't set the value. All right, so that'll update the to-do when we update this, and then when we return, we'll update the values. Okay, so let's click on maybe the second item, change this title, see if this works. First time. You can hit down to get rid of the keyboard, hit save. Okay, so it added that item. Didn't change the value. We'll handle that on another day because it's already been 2.5 hours instead of the 2 hours I was planning on this. But hopefully you guys learned a little bit of something, maybe picked up a tip or trick if you've already known most of this stuff. We'll be backing this with a data store and a bunch of other advanced features if you want to, but we'll keep going with this kind of in the same format as we did today next time. So again, hopefully you guys learned something.
I hope you found this video useful. Subscribe to see the next video in the series as we put in more advanced features in Kotlin, namely web services, embedded databases, and more. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.